Okay, we're ready to get started. Welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. My name is Chris Monsier. I'm a faculty member in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, and together with my colleague Jennifer Zill, we co-organize these Friday Transportation Seminars. So just as a reminder, we do broadcast live over the web, and there are people watching, so use your microphone, hold the touch button until the red light lights up when you ask your question. And so that the people on the web can hear it. So we're already streaming, so we're going to skip the around the room introductions, and I'll introduce our speaker today. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Shane Brown from Washington State University. He's a visiting Utrecht scholar. He was down at the Oregon State University campus giving this same talk yesterday, and so he's going to talk to us. He does a lot of work in engineering education research, which is something that I find fascinating and enjoy. We were working together on one project, and he's going to talk today about conceptual understandings of sight distance, which is, if you've had a class on that, you'll be interested to see what he has. So turn it over to Shane.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time out to come and listen to some of my research results. And I think you'll find some of it intriguing, especially if the student perspective is you'll resonate with some of the things that I found, I believe. So we're going to talk about conceptual and embedded transportation engineering knowledge from three different perspectives. One is students, and another one is faculty, and then the third group is engineers. And we're going to talk about their understandings of sight distance and stopping sight distance. The reason I chose these two particular topics is because other researchers have shown that both faculty and engineers believe that these are probably either the first or second most important topic in geometric design. So it's a good place to start exploring how people think about these things. So why would I do this research? It's motivated by high passing rates on something called the FE exam, which is the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, which engineering seniors, undergraduate seniors take and try to pass, and it's a step in getting licensed as an engineer. And the passing rate on that exam is about 80% or more, the national average. But it's kind of a plug-and-chug type exam. It's given some numbers, find a formula, plug some numbers in, see what happens. And that's in contrast to really poor performance on something called concept inventories. How many people know what a concept inventory is? Okay, that's what I thought, so I'll help you a little bit. Concept inventories are multiple choice questions that try to test students' conceptual knowledge. So an example from the physics concept inventory is if a father and daughter are ice skating and they push off of each other on the ice skating rink, then who exerts the greater force? And we know that it's equal because it has to be according to Newton and Newton's laws, but most young physics students think that the father exerts the greater force because he's bigger and stronger, and that's a really robust misconception. It's wrong, and it interferes with their ability to do other things. So students can calculate things with Newton's laws, but there's a lot of evidence they don't know exactly what they mean. So this suggests that engineering graduates and science graduates may be able to use equations, but don't really get the core concepts. And more anecdotally, engineering firms sort of often report that when they get new graduates, that they know how to do some stuff, but it's kind of a whole new world to them. They just don't know how to apply their knowledge. So these are kind of the motivating factors for me. So what I'll talk about today, and I'll try to speak in terms that are helpful for you and get you up to speed, is about conceptual understanding, conceptual change, and something called situated cognition. And then I have the results from three different studies that use common interview methods and common protocols. So I'll talk about those common methods, then we'll talk about students' understanding, differences between students and engineers and how they approach problems, and then differences and commonalities between engineers and faculties and how they think about these concepts, and then make some kind of more broad sweeping thoughts about what these results might mean. So conceptual understanding is what we consider a deep understanding of some concept. It means if you were a beam engineer and I ask you what normal stress was, you would know what it is fundamentally, you would know what it is in members that twist, you would know what it is in members that bend, and members that you pull on and push on. You would sort of get it in every possible context. So it's that deep, meaningful, robust, transferable understanding. And again, students in STEM disciplines have shown not to have good conceptual understanding. So there are concept inventories in thermodynamics, statics, force, statistics.
Could you define
of course, thank you very much. It's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I chose these disciplines, honestly, partially because the National Science Foundation has a lot of interest in STEM learning. And students learning around STEM, like science things, they have a lifetime of experiencing things falling and moving that interacts with what they're trying to learn. So that's why this is a good framework for that. Conceptual change is the idea that everything you try to learn, you have some pre-existing notion of the way it should work. So sight distance, for example, all of you have spent a number of years, either as a passenger or a driver, thinking about how far you can see down the road, how long it takes to stop once you see something, and you have notions of what those things are, and unfortunately they're not all right, and even more unfortunately, students are really committed to some really wrong ideas about fundamental science and engineering concepts, and those are misconceptions. So my research is interested in what are those, why are they hard to learn, and how can we overcome those. So we're focused on not just the answer that you give or a student would give, but what are all the sort of surrounding notions around that particular answer. Sometimes I got in trouble talking about this a little bit yesterday, because if there's teachers in the audience, then my message could be you're not a very good teacher because you're not having students learn these things. And that's not true at all. I think that there's pretty consistent findings across teachers and courses and implementations that students don't change their misconceptions. So one really cool but sad study was they implemented the physics concept inventory to 2 cohorts of people. One of them was a group of students who took a physics course, and they did it pre and post, before and after the course. And another one was a group of students who did not take the physics course, and the students who didn't take the course improved more than the students who did take the course. So there's really, and you'll see at the end, I believe that that's because of kind of the plug and chug, not really digging into people's previous notions and the concepts is the reasons why that might even be possible. So it's not an indictment of teachers and them not doing a good job. There's 2 practitioners, Steve Krause and Paul Stife, who spent years on one subject area trying to get students to do better conceptually, and it's a long, sort of purposeful, methodical process. So this is falls within cognition, which is education, which is a small piece of education, and I'm really interested in what goes on in the mind and not so much external factors that may have influenced that. So what the teacher did, well, how motivated students were, how confident they were. I'm not so interested in that. I'm just interested in what do they know and how do they think about those things. There's also something that I'm increasingly fascinated with, which is situated cognition, and that suggests that the way that we apply our knowledge is dependent on what's given to us. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a study of individuals on Weight Watchers, and they ask them to eat 1/3 of 2/3 of a cup of cottage cheese. And they asked them to do it mathematically, and so they would do some a multiplication of fractions and some reduction and figure out what that was. And you don't have a measuring cup that has that amount, so it's kind of a challenge. So they addressed it one way when they're asked to do it mathematically. But you can imagine if they were asked to do the same thing with the cottage cheese and measuring cups, what they did is they took the 2/3 of a cup, dumped it out, and split it up into 3 pieces and said that's 1/3 of 2/3 of a cup. So situated cognition is we interact with a problem based on the resources that we have, and it's not something that we do the same no matter what's in front of us. So I'm suggesting that maybe the way engineers and faculty and students think about these things is much different, and it's at least partially true, I believe, based on our findings. So I want to know what they think about sight distance and stopping sight distance. I want to synthesize those things, and I want to compare them across these groups, and that's what we'll do. That's what I'll take you through today. So we interviewed 18 students, 29 engineers, 19 instructors. We have course notes from 10 instructors, and then we looked at 3 really common transportation engineering textbooks to look at how these concepts are represented. So we have a pretty broad diversity in both the engineers and the instructors, private and public sectors, lots of different levels of experience and from different locations. So I think this could be almost representative of engineers across the country. I'm close to being confident with that statement. At least in the Northwest, we have representative data. So when you do quantitative research and you want to pick a sample size, the goal is to have a sample size that adequately describes the population from which you're pulling from. Right? And the magic number that non-statisticians don't understand why is 30, right? If you have 30, that's good enough. Well, that depends on what the variation is in the variable you're looking at, and it depends on the population you're looking at. Well, we use the same logic, and when we do interviews, we use a concept called saturation, which means in the interviews that you do, you stop doing interviews as soon as you're not getting any new data from the subsequent interviews. So we do them in batches. So we'll do 10 interviews. We'll look at what variability is there across the interviewees. Then we'll do 5 more, and we'll say, what did we learn new from those 5 interviews that we didn't know in the previous 10? And at the point where we do a few interviews and we don't learn anything new, then we stop doing interviews. So it's a logical way of reaching sort of a representing the sample from which we're drawing. We did face-to-face and telephone interviews. I'll talk about that in a minute. A semi-structured interview just means we have a core set of questions that we ask, and then we have some probes that we follow up with. It's a clinical approach, which was developed by Jean Piaget, a famous educational psychologist. And that, again, means we're not interested in the answer necessarily. We're interested in all the sort of surrounding preconceived notions and experiences that relate to that answer. And these are social interaction events. I mean, if I interview you, it's a social interaction event between us, and the goal is to reduce the authority construct. So if I showed up dressed like this to do an interview with one of you in a place that was my office, then you would feel less comfortable than if I was dressed normally and it was a shared space, I would imagine. So we're trying to redistribute the authority construct so students are comfortable, and engineers and faculty, sharing what they know about these things. And it's interesting, engineers didn't want to redistribute the authority construct because it was one of my graduate students that did these interviews, and they didn't give up the authority very easily or at all. So we learned something in interviewing engineers. So I did 2 protocols, interview protocols. The only thing I want you to remember for now about these is the first protocol had problems that they solved, and then they talked about how they solved the problems while they were doing them. And the second protocol was only questions, like what is sight distance, what is stopping sight distance. But in the second one, there was no problem solving. It was just asking them about what these concepts are, how do you teach your students to do these things, what references you do, what does this role does this play. So again, the first protocol was problem solving and talking about problem solving. The second one was just these just interview questions. We used accepted qualitative research methods, and if there's questions about this at the end, I can answer them. But it's a really iterative process to make sure the story I'm telling you today is representative of the data. So we had maybe 600 pages of data that a student went through maybe 10 times, over and over and over again, to make sure what I'm telling you is representative. And we'd count stuff, and we'd recount it, and we'd try to sort of make sense of it in a reasonable way. So here we go. This is the interesting part to me, and I think to you. Here's some of the results. So student understanding. They had fundamental sort of misunderstandings between these 2 concepts of sight distance and stopping sight distance. And I know that there's some people who aren't engineers in here. So sight distance is just how far you can see down the roadway in front of you. So on a vertical curve, it could be as you're cresting the curve, you kind of have minimum sight distance right before you crest because you can't see down the road very far. On a horizontal curve, it could be there's a building or an obstruction in the way. So it's just how far you can see down the roadway. Stopping sight distance is once you decide to stop, it's how the distance it takes to stop. And it's composed of making a decision, like, oh goodness, I'm about to hit something, I need to stop, and then braking time. So we interviewed students on these concepts, and we found the first is they have fundamental misunderstandings. There's a really unhealthy interaction between what students know about these concepts from their experiences and the classroom knowledge, and unfortunately kind of a blind, unhealthy reliance on equations to solve these things. So to make quantitative researchers like to count things. So for this particular publication, we counted stuff to make the journal happy that we published this in. So we counted things, and we decided we have profile A through D. A generally did really well in the interviews and got things right. Profile D had some fundamental issues in their understandings of these things. And one question that's always asked is, how were these distributed across course grades? And we had in Profile D, where again there's some serious issues, we had A, B, and C students. So this wasn't correlated at all with course grade. And the other thing is really profiles B, C, and D all had some fundamental issues. So 14 out of the 18 students really had incorrect notions of the way these things worked. The key things that I would sort of point out is that at the bottom, for example, heavy equation reliance, no connection between their personal experiences and the definitions, poor answers to open-ended questions, reliance on personal experiences, and these things are going to come up in the quotes that I'll show you in a second. So the themes are, I think, equation reliance and interaction between personal experience and these concepts are the big ones that will come up. So here's an example. What is sight distance? Profile A says really be how far you can see without obstructions. On a curve, that's about right. Profile D student said, well, I think, essentially said, he or she said, I think it's the same thing as stopping sight distance. And it's not the same thing. They're used congruently in geometric design, but they're not the same concept. So this student hadn't even created a category for these two concepts. And then Profile C was kind of comparable. Well, stopping sight distance usually comes to mind. And the thing I think that's interesting about this is I imagine either Chris, who's in the audience, or I could spend maybe 20 minutes with any one of you and talk about these concepts, and you'd get it in a way that's probably more robust than is being displayed in these interviews. So there's something going on with the students' interaction with the content. Profile C. So there's a few things that are interesting to me from these quotes. So Profile C, we asked them to calculate the stopping sight distance from the given information. So what do they start with? They said, O, and this was O, and I'm not sure, but I think I'll start talking about something. It wasn't O like I'm about to strategize. It's O, here we go. I'll just talk about some stuff, and maybe I'll get somewhere productive. And that's okay, because they haven't had a lot of experience with this, but there's a lot of a lack of confidence in their ability to execute what we've asked them to do. I would need, I don't really remember the equation, so an immediate reliance on an equation. There's no talk about what this means kind of in the world. It's just I need an equation. And then it'd be your perception time to react. I think I'm doing it wrong. Okay, so I feel bad because I don't remember if this is the equation we used in class. So are you getting this theme of like I look for an equation, if I don't get comfortable with finding an equation, then I'm just gonna say I really don't want to do this, or I'm very uncomfortable doing it. Take a moment to look at the figure below, and we ask them to calculate something called horizontal sight offset. Don't worry about that too much. It's related to stopping sight distance. And again, it was, what did this person say? If I remembered some numbers, if I remembered the equation, I'd be okay. This was an open-ended question, so we would just sketch two tangents on a sheet of paper and say, how would you approach the design of a horizontal curve? And these are really good interview questions because they get at students' kind of foundational ways of thinking about these things without giving them kind of more textbook-like problems. So again, Profile A, they ask some really good questions. You need the grade. You need to think about stopping sight distance. You need to think about the radius. That's pretty good for a student. That's a reasonable approach to a very open-ended problem. So so look at Profile D. What did Profile D start with in contrast to Profile A? Profile A said, you need to know, and then listed some things that were all correct in thinking about a design. Look at what Profile D said, starting off with, I guess. And so it's a really non-commitment to an answer, and then just, well, I think about the speed, and then it'd be crucial, the radius, I'm not sure. I'd like to know where the roads are. And it's just this sort of mishmash of, give me some numbers, I don't really know what I'm doing, maybe an equation would help. Okay, I'm done talking about this concept. Another example, well, let's just look at this one, Profile D. We ask him what he or she, what sight distance is, and they gave a reasonable definition. Then we ask what stopping sight distance is, pretty much the same. And then what was fascinating from an educational psychology perspective at least was after these two questions, they would tell a really elaborate story embedded in which was perfect definitions of sight distance and stopping sight distance. So I'm driving down the road, I see a deer, okay, that's an obstruction, and then I thought about what I should do, and then I slammed on my brakes and I didn't hit them. That has all the definitions of these concepts that are correct, but they said, oh, that stopping sight distance doesn't exist. I'm not sure what that is. And if we think back to the constructivist conceptual change approach, the healthiest way to help students learn is to interact meaningfully with their preconceived notions of the concepts we want them to learn. And that's not happening here because they have really good stories about what's going on, but they don't get to interact very well with the correct notions from the class. So students had trouble with these concepts. Their driving experience did not interact in a healthy way with the classroom stuff, and they just would kind of blindly shoot and use equations. Okay, it gets more fun. Well, at least in my opinion, the results even get more interesting. So now we looked at student engineer approaches, and here's the 4 kind of chunks of results that we came up with. One is that the engineers either answered it correctly or said, I know how to do that, I'd go to this reference. They sort of seamlessly talked about real-world experiences and the equations. When we gave them these textbook problems and these kind of open-ended problems, they said those are like, I'd have to go get my textbook. And these are people who design roads every day of their life. And they said, I'd have to go get my course notes and my textbook to figure that out. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it seems like they would say, oh, that's a concept that's important. That would be easy for me if they do it on a day-to-day basis. And the engineers would absolutely not give a wrong answer. If they didn't know how to do it, they'd say, I don't know how to do it, and I don't want to try to do it. But students, as you saw, would flail is not quite the right word, and that's a little bit unfair, but sort of flail in this guessing space. I guess maybe this is what's happening. So, okay, see, I feel bad because I don't remember the equation we used in class. The definition of sight distance, not so good. So look at what the engineer said. I've never been a memorized formula kind of person, so I would go to these 2 design books, and then they elaborated on where they would go and what they would look for and how they would think about it, and then they would clearly define the concepts in pretty context-dependent terms, and we'll talk about that more in a second. So they would tell these stories. If you were standing on a road, it's the furthest distance down a roadway you could see an object. And then they talk about the different heights and how that affects how you can see down the roadway. And then you would be able to see a person if you were a driver. So this is a correct definition, and this was, again, seamlessly integrated with the way they thought about kind of the course or the equations and the applications of these things. Okay, again, this was one of the most fascinating findings. We were hoping these engineers these problems would be horribly easy for them. And they would look at them, and almost in all cases with the textbooks problems, they would say, oh, you're really testing my memory here. I got to go get my course notes. I got to go get my textbook. And then since they didn't have those things, we'd ask them to solve the problems. They'd say, well, no, I don't want to do that. I'm either going to do it correctly with my resources or I'm not going to do it at all. And I think a little bit that was the authority construct I mentioned earlier, but I think a little bit of it, as an engineer, you can't get things wrong. Well, you can't get things wrong a lot or big things wrong. That's a better way of saying it. So, they referred to their education and they said these don't really make sense in terms of the way on the day-to-day, my day-to-day thinking about engineering design. And this was interesting too. Again, students, we're pretty uncomfortable, or comfortable getting the wrong answer and just talking through it. And the engineers would just say, again, I don't know how to do this. And that's the end of it. And that's a totally different approach to a problem from the students. Okay, and this is, are there any practicing engineers in here? Are there any practicing engineers looking at me from a computer somewhere? Okay, well, I'm sure there are. Please don't answer right now. So the goal of this study was to compare how faculty and engineers think about concepts and see if they were different, and to compare those 2 things. So here's the themes that came out of these comparisons is the faculty and the engineers had pretty common knowledge of these concepts. There's a big difference in how they define terms. Talk about that in a second. And there's a big difference in how they said they would determine these sight distance and stopping sight distance. And then we analyzed a textbook and course notes and to see how they represented those concepts, and kind of looked at how those compared with engineers and faculty. So common knowledge. So in the interviews, we found if you considered the entire content of the interviews, then the knowledge of these concepts was about the same. So throughout the interviews with engineers and faculty, they would talk about signals and vertical and horizontal alignments and obstacles and AASHTO and safety and context, but the propensity of some of these things in the interviews was much different between faculty and engineers. So even though they'd both come up eventually, the number of times and the way in which they came up was much different between these two cohorts. So for example, the instructor and the engineer both gave reasonably correct definitions of stopping sight distance and how it relates to sight distance, and you don't consider them alone, they're considered together, and it's iterative. But what happened is the instructors, so 13 of 19 is about 60 or so percent of those, or a little bit more than that percentage of them, when we asked them to define these things, they would embed one context, and engineers, about 2/3 of them, a little bit more, embedded 3 or more contexts in their definition when we asked them to define these things. So let me show you what I mean by that to clarify. So the instructor, this is sort of a common response from an instructor, simply the amount of visibility available to the driver at any particular point along the roadway. And there's only one context. It's just how far you could see along the roadway. The engineers, again, kind of a typical response. It's the distance you could see from any spot on the roadway, in between obstructions on the road, off the road, or created by the road itself. And that's embedded with some meanings that those engineers, I believe, associate with projects that they've worked on and how they think about this concept in practice. So this is a little bit of a simplified, I believe, a simplified kind of linear definition, and this is kind of an embedded context-dependent definition, and that was a big difference we found. So when we asked them, again, I'm excited about this, I hope somebody else is in here. When we asked them, how would you determine these two things? The engineers said, I'd go to my code books, my AASHTO manual, local, state, and city manuals. They talked about which one governed over the other, because sometimes city manuals govern over AASHTO. And they talked about field tests. They said, we'll go out on the roadway, and a 6-foot height is reasonable, and we'll look down the road, and you can, with surveying equipment, you can really easily measure how far you can see. They would take engineering plans and lay them out and use little stick figures, and then they would say, okay, using this little stick figure, you could see about this far down the roadway. Or they would use computer programs quite often. So faculty and instructors said, if I had to determine those things, I'd go to my textbook. Mostly textbook and course notes is how I determine those things. And again, it's not good or bad, but there's significant differences in how they approach these concepts between these two disciplines, which suggests that they're situated. If you remember situated cognition, they're situated in the culture in which they're embedded and the ways in which they use them. So this was, my student did a fine job of coming up with some slides that represent the way the textbooks represent these concepts. And honestly, I don't think we should have said decontextualize, which we do later. They just put it in a different context. So it's a different way of thinking about it. And we think it's removed from the working field. It's definitely defined by variables, and it's sort of embedded in equations, and there was no sentences or structure like the engineers gave when we asked them to define these things. So we looked in the index for stopping sight distance. It was in the middle of one chapter, and it said stopping sight distance is the sum of equation 2.2 and 2.4, for example. And that's all that it said. And then we went to those two equations, and we found them, and they were in the place that they said they were. They were in different sections of that chapter. And then the definition that we got to for those two equations was, well, that definition is that equation that's on that page. Again, there wasn't any embedded context on what it means or how you'd use it. It's just like A is equal to B plus C. That's what stopping sight distance is. And then we looked in the paragraph above and below and could piece together the variables, but again, no context. We finally kind of put together a quantitative definition of these, put it all back together on our own, and came up with an equation, but again, not much sort of how to use it, what do you do with it. It was all numbers and variables. So we believe, again, that it's different. It's different than the context that the engineers talked about it. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but at least we have some evidence to show that it's different, and we have a starting point for our conversation. The emphasis, again, the other thing is, remember I told you that engineers and faculty consider sight distance and stopping sight distance to be either the first or second most important consideration in geometric design. Well, the textbooks didn't represent them that way. They were embedded in places where they're hard to find, not sort of prominent features of those chapters. I hope there's no textbook authors out there either. And then the course notes, faculty course notes seem to be kind of a marriage of the textbook material and people's personal experiences, which you can imagine. They're kind of a personalized version of the content. And I think a lot of faculty, including myself, when they teach a course for the first time, start with a textbook, because you can't write your own notes or textbooks. You have to start with some structure. There's a lot of derivations. We believe, this is a troublemaking statement a little bit, but we say minimal emphasis on the real-world value of these things, and a lot of sort of linear examples. Here's an equation that has 5 variables. Here's 4 of them, and find the other one. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So how do we make sense of this? These are sort of, I think conclusions are defined as my opinions on what these things mean, and hopefully guided by the results. So there seems to be, during class, there's this, if you could just sort of loosely think of this graph as what they're learning and how they're making sense of it in terms of what they know already. There's this sort of scattered, not super efficient meaning making, and then something happens in the field during those first or 2 years where it becomes really concrete, really conceptual. I know what it means, I know where to go to get it, I know how to apply it. And so these are, if any of you want to become faculty, these are researchable questions in any field probably. Fundable, that's the most important thing, researchable questions. When did the change happen? How did it happen? What can we learn? And does it look the same in all fields? Maybe structural engineers have good understandings of sort of core concepts. This was just an interesting summary of sort of students' thoughts. So one of the students says, it's just kind of hard. Like usually when I do these kinds of problems, I have my books and notes in front of me, so I haven't committed a whole lot from memory. And I would guess if you said, my goal for these 2 weeks is to have you do these things, this is not what you would hope a student would say as a result of these hours of interaction with them. And I'm guilty of the same thing, so I'm not proclaiming to be a teacher that solved all these issues. I'm just collecting a body of evidence so that faculty in general can say maybe there's different or sort of adjustable ways of teaching and approaching these things. I believe that courses are designed, engineering courses, the courses that we've studied, are designed to cover large quantities of equation-based problem solving, and I think it's at the expense of real-world context-dependent problems. And we have some evidence to suggest that that's true. One of the educational psychologists, like other researchers, don't agree on a lot of things. One of the things they all agree upon is that the content of most courses should be reduced substantially, by like half, because we try to cover too many things, and we consider coverage. What do faculty consider coverage to be? Is talking about it. What do students consider coverage to be? I learned it. And those are, those quite often don't line up. Just because I talked about it doesn't mean you get it, I don't think. I wish it was true. That'd be really easy and fun and productive, but it just doesn't work that way. And we think that the context, students are learning these concepts out of context, at least out of the context in which they'll apply it. And this was really interesting. Engineers, when they talked about sight distance and stopping sight distance, saw it as an iterative approach. You calculate, you check, you compare, you verify, you change, you move the roadway a little bit. It wasn't about an answer. It was about sort of a reasonable solution. And most of the time, instructors, and especially in course notes and textbooks, is this linear single answer approach. And those are two definitely different ways of thinking about it. So, maybe there's some room for discussion there. And we think that, of course, my opinion is learning out without this context, I don't think they're as good of engineers as they can be when they get out of school. I think that Chris was at a conference last summer with transportation engineers, and there is some faculty who said the purpose of engineering is not to prepare students to be engineers. And I thought of that, interpreted that as just an extended hazing experience, I guess then. A really expensive, extensive hazing experience. And I don't think most faculty don't believe that, but I was astounded that somebody would say, I'm not here to prepare engineers for the workplace. I know there's other things to do that higher education serves, but that's one of among a list of things I think we want to accomplish. Again, this was also kind of a big summary way of thinking of this, is instructors and engineers had the same knowledge, but for some reason the way that knowledge propagated itself into the course notes and into the classroom was much different, did not fully represent the way they thought about these things. So for, I don't know if it was time constraints or more matching the way the textbook did things, but they knew they had the knowledge and the work experience to solve these or to make a more context dependent approach to these things, but they chose not to do that. And that could be a time prioritization thing. Maybe they followed the lead of the textbook. Maybe we consider this could be I won't use this term too much, don't worry, but an epistemological phenomenon. Students often think that knowledge is like embedded in the faculty and they're the expert and whatever they tell me is true. But a more healthy view of learning is that's a resource, a textbook is a resource, my notes are a resource, and I need to internalize these understandings. So it's on me, not just listen to them and sort of parrot what they say. And I think there's some evidence that students have unhealthy epistemologies. And we suggest that they may benefit from a different approach. So I think, especially concerning this idea of context and embedded knowledge, so we could say, what makes engineers and instructors approach to learning differently and approach to teaching differently and their knowledge differently? Did they learn it differently? And could you ask an instructor or train them to incorporate contextual-based knowledge into their classroom? And if you can't, then do faculty need work experience to be able to do this? And so how do we, in kind of a practical sense, let's assume that the lack of context in an engineering classroom is not efficient, then how do we approach that problem is the big kind of practical question. I'd like to thank NIAT at the University of Idaho for funding this research. The National Science Foundation has funded a new project in a different content area, and OTREC, of course, funded my trip here. So thank you to all those people, and thank you all for listening. Yes?
So I'm curious to know, the engineers that you interviewed, did you have any criteria for the experience that they have, like how many years of experience they had or not?
That's a good question. We initially did, so our first batch of interviews, we wanted to get people with like 3 to 5 years of experience. And the rationale behind that was just based on a set of logic where we figured if they had less than that, then they may be more relying on kind of academic knowledge. So if they had like 6 months of experience, that may not reasonably represent the field knowledge. And if they had 30 years of experience, then it may be kind of a more of a management perspective, and they may have lost touch with kind of the nitty-gritty of the design. It turns out of convenience, we sampled some people with lots of experience, like 20 and 25 years of experience, and they had the same pretty consistent stories and definitions of these things as the people with 5 years of experience. So there was not a lot of variation across experience levels. We didn't interview anybody with like 1 or less years of experience, and I think honestly, I think that data is what a next step could be really interesting to see what stage are they in terms of becoming experts in the field.
I have a question. This isn't from online, but it's from me. How many of the faculty have actually designed a road?
We had more than half of the faculty had 5 or more years of geometric design experience. And we didn't find big variability between faculty who had experience and faculty who did not have experience. And sort of loosely speaking, I believe that might be because these concepts are relatively easy. And I think if you looked at really complicated concepts, for example, in like traffic signal design, then there may be more exacerbated differences between people with lots of experience and not much experience. And some faculty had 10 or 15 years of experience, an instructor, and they didn't talk about it much differently than people with less experience. Oh, there's in the back first.
Oh. Do I need to press a button?
No.
So earlier in your presentation, you were talking about the order of the interview protocols, I think, and in the initial one, you were looking to get sort of information around what experience informs the way people think.
Mm-hmm.
And so did you guys have trouble getting that from students? And was there a troubleshooting period where you had to formulate questions in a certain way, or did letting them just sort of go on reveal the information you were looking for?
We did have a little bit of a pilot study where we had a iterative improvement of our interview protocol, but the thing that we did correctly at the beginning is we gave them lots of different contexts in which to talk about these concepts, because if they did have conceptual understanding, then they'd be able to sort of apply it in a reasonably uniform way. So that was one thing we did correctly, is we had just sketches of things, we had homework problems, we had open-ended questions, and we looked at sort of consistency across those contexts to make our results a little bit more valid. The other thing we did, and this is reasonably well shown to be effective, is we started with kind of loose open-ended problems and then became more and more defined. And the rationale behind that is if you start with a defined kind of homework type problem and move to an open-ended problem, we believe, and it's been shown reasonably so, that their interaction with that first homework-like problem has a strong influence on the way they interact with the open-ended problem. So if we gave them a horizontal site offset question and then said, talk about this, they'd say, I think horizontal site offset is important. So we started very open-ended. I think there's a lot to be learned, because one of our assumptions is that you can get at students' conceptual understanding in an interview. And some people may suggest that you should get to homework problems or exams and kind of validate with outside resources. But the problem is, unfortunately, is that homework problems and exam questions don't often measure conceptual understanding. They measure more plug-and-chug understanding. But I think some of those, the question is, we tried to take reasonable steps based on what we thought would be appropriate, and we used some of the literature to do multiple contexts, but there's still room for being better at this, I think. Yes, go ahead.
Most people are right-handed or generally more aware of what goes on their right side. Does this affect the way people kind of think and react? Or would it make a difference if you interviewed, say, people from the UK who live and breathe and drive on the other side of the road or whatever?
I would guess that it might, and because I think some of the driving experiences we would expect that students bring to them with the classroom are totally dependent on the roadway system that they've engaged with their whole life. So I would guess there would be differences, and I think that'd be interesting to look at. The other thing that'd be really interesting is if you had a student who didn't have experience in sort of a roadway system as we know it, and how did they compartmentalize their previous knowledge and the knowledge we were trying to get them to learn. And I guess it may even be easier, because if you didn't have a lifetime of driving, then you hadn't sort of come up with these wrong or kind of confusing notions of the way the world works. So that's a good question, but we haven't investigated it. Yes?
Did this report discover a certain point at which a student would, I guess, try to conceptually critically try to think about a problem versus an engineer who would entirely mask behind a correct or incorrect answer? Was there individuals that were kind of bridging that gap, or was it just, I'm an engineer, I'm upholding this title, or I'm a student and I'm essentially still learning?
I think that that's another very good question. I think that we had a little bit of variation in the engineers. So all of them, that's really interesting. All of them didn't say, here's the answer, I'd go to these code books and then I'd be done with it. And so some of them, they had different epistemologies. I think some engineers said there's an absolute answer and you go to that and you're kind of done. And other ones say you're never really done. You just reach a level of satisfaction that you won't hurt anybody with the design that you've come up with. And that's probably a reasonable sort of summary of the engineering approach to design, is like minimizing negative impacts, I guess. Students, I think, in my talk and the way I presented it, I was picking on them a little bit, but I think they're in the process of conceptual change. So they're flipping back and forth between stories and equations and variables is actually healthy, because I think that means they're trying to make sense of the problem. It's just that I don't think we're doing a good job of letting them interact with those previous experiences. I mean, I've never done a homework problem and anything where they said, what are your notions of this problem that you bring to the classroom with you, and then had somebody try to integrate those with what I was trying to do. The concept inventories are a very powerful instrument for that, because you can quickly look at the results from those and get at what students, like what misconceptions they have and how common they are in your classroom. That answer your question? Good. Sure. Yes.
How important do you think it is to get students out in the field? Because they're always looking at 2D site plans or equations that are really flat. Then you get out there and there's variables you didn't even think of.
There's a big. My opinion is we need more of that because there's an educational debate as to whether or not you start with little, sort of a deductive approach is the way it's common in education. And that means you take a project like that and you break it into 100 little chunks, and in the freshman year you look at the lower level ones, and then sophomore year you bring them together a little bit, and then junior year you bring them together more, and the senior year you kind of have this big view. Other people think you start with a big view and you do kind of an active just-in-time approach. Here's a really complicated problem, and we'll sort of feed you the stuff you need just in time to solve this open-ended problem. So I think more kind of authentic, field-based problems would be really good. Why do faculty not do those? Because they're really hard and they require a ton of time, and then they require you to really sort of invest yourself in sort of the multiple possible outcomes that the students could present to you. There's really a lot of evidence that that sort of open problem-based learning would be far more effective. So if we had to reinvent higher education and engineering education, I don't think we'd say go take 2 years of chemistry, calculus, and physics, and you'll do poorly in most of those, and then come and see us after that. I think we'd engage them in a meaningful way in the engineering curriculum from the very beginning. Hope that answered your question. Yes?
Is there any evidence that certain...
Are you using the microphone?
Is there any evidence that certain people or students are attracted to these, you refer to the STEM fields, as compared to, let's say, students that are in the arts, and how would that affect, trying to teach them more conceptual type education rather than the more what they're used to? So,
I guess I could have two answers. I'm really glad you asked that question. One of them is unfortunately the STEM disciplines, and especially engineering, we lose a lot of students who are sort of creative thinkers and who mostly who have altruistic tendencies and don't see the opportunity in engineering to do altruistic things. And unfortunately, a guy from Black and Veatch came to WSU a year ago and he said, if you want to save lives, you should be a water engineer because you could save a lot more lives as a water engineer than you can as a medical doctor. So I think, to answer your question, partially we lose a lot of students who have strong altruistic tendencies and a lot of female students, unfortunately. I believe, and this is a huge opportunity in a research area, I believe we attract students who are sort of akin to this linear, kind of sequential, just get the answer approach. And I'm not sure that we want all those types of students to have a healthy engineering workforce. One of our assumptions, I was hoping somebody would kind of beat me up with it a little bit, is that we've assumed when we interview engineers that they do things the right way. And we do things, and generally people don't die, but that doesn't mean that process is optimized or they do as good as they could. And I imagine changing the culture, or at least students' interpretation of what it means to be an engineer, might help get a different, more epistemologically diverse group of students into the workforce. I think we choose things based on beliefs that we have that we may not even personally understand.
So, question from the web, a little bit of paraphrasing, that practicing engineers don't seem to do much derivation on a daily basis. Why do faculty seem to do it all the time?
Okay, here we go. I think that, and it's another sort of researchable question, I think, is that that's a certain view of what it means to know and what it means to learn. And I think it's an enculturation process where the classes we took are sort of filled with derivations. I also think that faculty associate some assumed value with that derivation that's probably not true. So we say, well, if you can do this derivation, then you'll understand the whole thing. You'll have conceptual understanding, right? And I don't think that that's true necessarily. And I think that I think that we need to figure, as educational researchers, we need to figure those things out. So you could even do kind of a simple experimental study where you had students, one set of students engage in a derivation and then try to apply that, and another set of students sort of randomly selected that did kind of a context-dependent real-world problem, and see who could do more kind of in an engineering design scenario. So I think it's tied to academic sort of intrigue with derivations and our beliefs about sort of what it means to know and to learn. And I don't think it's a good, conscious, effective decision. Hope I'm not. If anybody from WSU is listening, I hope I don't get fired.
I'd put my money on the active group.
Yeah, right.
How much detailed information did you get about the students' schools, like the faculty to student ratio, or if they went on field trips more often than students in other classes?
That would have been, I think that's a really great next step. The scope of our project didn't really allow us to analyze it at that detail, but we could go back and get that very easily because we interviewed faculty from, I think, 6 different universities. It might have been a few more. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head. But it'd be pretty easy to go back and check that because I think that's another body of evidence that needs to be collected by educational researchers. I don't know who asked the question earlier, but what meaning, how does going on field trips and engaging and sort of looking at stuff in a 3D world help them develop conceptual understanding, transferable conceptual understanding? So the answer is we didn't get it, but I think it's a very good idea, and I can imagine doing that soon. We have another project. We're going to track a cohort of, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think you'll find it interesting, a cohort of 20 civil engineers from their senior year into the second year of the workforce, and we're going to look at what conceptual challenges they face and how they overcome those challenges. And I think that could give cues onto how they interact with these different contexts and how that helps them learn things, which you could maybe transfer back into education. At least that's why they funded it, because we said we'd try to do that.
All right, well, before we thank Dr. Brown for his presentation, next week's speaker will be Wes Wilson from the University of Oregon. He's an economist. I don't think we have his topic yet, but it'll be on something related to economics. So thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free.